The skeletal system has six functions. Describe two functions of the skeletal system and justify why they are relevant to performance in the sport of rugby. And this is a 9-mark question. So, for our 9-mark questions, we need to consider AO1, AO2, and AO3. So, we can get a maximum of 2 marks for AO1, and these are points that we make that show knowledge on the question. We can get a maximum of 2 marks for AO2, which relates to explanation or examples. And then we can get a maximum of 5 marks for AO3, which is our evaluation, which often links to sporting performance. This is quite a nice question because we've got a range of different functions that we can choose to talk about. So there's 6 functions in total, but we only need to discuss 2. However, we must make sure that we're linking to the sport of rugby. You can lay your answer out how you wish, but you may find it easy to do one paragraph for AO1, one paragraph for AO2, and a third paragraph for AO3. So for AO1, we need to make 2 points only for a maximum of 2 marks. And we just need to mention and show our knowledge of any 2 of the 6 functions of the skeletal system. So any of these are absolutely fine. But if we think we're going to be relating them to rugby, the best examples could potentially be the protection of vital organs and perhaps blood production, red and white blood cells, so red and white blood cell production, and perhaps joints for movement as well. We then need to explain the points that we've made, so the functions that we've discussed relative to rugby, the sport of rugby. So if we talked about protection, if that was one of our functions, we could say that rugby is a sport that requires protection due to the physical nature of this sport and the likelihood of receiving knocks or bangs during contact. If you went down a route of blood cell production, we could say that players require a blood count with a high number of red blood cells due to the aerobic nature of the sport. So again, we've shown our knowledge of rugby in terms of the functions that are required. Or if you put joints for movement, you might say that rugby players are required to bend low to pick up the ball, and the joints, such as the knee joint, allow for this movement. Obviously, if you've given other examples from rugby and used other functions of the skeletal system, then this is fine as well. And now we need to consider AO3, so our evaluation points, this is where we go into a bit more detail regarding the question and showing a real knowledge and detailed knowledge of the functions of the skeletal system. So again, if we talked about protection, we could say that rugby involves tackling whereby poor technique can result in a bang to the head. The cranium is important to protect the brain in this instance. So we're going a little bit deeper to show our knowledge of certain parts of the skeletal system here. We could say if a player is tackled offensively by an opponent in the midriff, their ribs will be required to protect them from damage to their lungs. If you have been discussing blood cell production, we could say a high count of red blood cells will help a rugby player get oxygen to their muscles throughout the whole match, preventing fatigue and improving performance. So we've made a direct link there to performance, and we understand that players are trying to stop themselves becoming fatigued towards the end of matches. A high red blood cell count will be particularly important for a scrum half who must constantly get to the breakdown and to rucks. So you're showing a bit of sporting knowledge here, as well as a link to that function of the skeletal system. If a player suffers from a cut or abrasion in a tackle, they may need to produce white blood cells in order to prevent or act against an infection. And if we have discussed joints for movement, you could say that flexion will take place at the knee joint in order for a player to get low enough to make a tackle. A large range of motion at the knee will allow the player to produce a more effective and efficient tackle. So again, we're making some really in-depth links to the sport of rugby there in relation to the functions of the skeletal system.